Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I still remember. The first day standing in front of that house. The sky was gloomy and each cold wind swept past, making me shiver. The broker told me that I would be the first to own it. The newly built house was beautiful and spacious, and the price was much cheaper than the surrounding area. I originally did not believe in luck, but at that time, I thought that luck had really smiled on me. My name is Daniel, a single man who had just gone through a difficult period in his life. I lost my job, broke up with my lover, and the feeling of loneliness always weighed heavily on my shoulders. When I had the opportunity to own this house, I considered it a new beginning, a new chapter in my life. The house was at the end of a deserted street, surrounded by tall, dense trees. From afar, it looked like a dark, gloomy picture. The window frames were black like empty eye sockets. Standing in front of the heavy wooden door, I felt a cold air coming out, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I reassured myself that it was just the feeling of someone who was too sensitive. Then I stepped inside. Inside was a spacious but quiet space. To quiet, my footsteps echoed as if someone was walking with me. I stopped to listen, but other than the wind whistling through the cracks of the door, there was no other sound. The walls were painted ivory white, but there were stains like thin blood seeping through the paint. The wooden floor creaked every time I walked. I opened each room door, trying to imagine the scene of my new life, but the deeper I went inside, the more I felt like this house was not new. It was like it had witnessed many years of secrets. Stories that no one wanted to know. The first night I stayed, I couldn't sleep. A strange noise came from downstairs, as if someone was walking around the living room. I lay still, my ears straining to listen. Each step was slow and heavy, then stopped right at the foot of the stairs leading to my room. My heart was pounding. I knew for sure I had locked the door before going to bed, and no one else had the key. I mustered up the courage to go down and check, but when I turned on the light, everything was still quiet, as if no one had ever appeared. I told myself it could just be a mouse or the sound of the wind blowing, but when I returned to bed, something terrible happened on the small mirror next to the bed. There were lines of words that appeared like steam. Someone had scribbled a name. The name was Daniel, my name. I couldn't believe my eyes. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the words had disappeared as if they had never existed. I lay trembling, not daring to close my eyes until morning the next day. I told this story to my nearest neighbor, an old lady who lived a few houses away. She stared at me, then chuckled and said I must have been dreaming. I asked about the history of the house. She hesitated, then avoided answering. Her cloudy eyes made me uneasy. I wanted to know more, but it seemed like everyone in the neighborhood was avoiding the subject that evening. Sitting in the living room, I heard a long whisper coming from the walls. My name was Daniel. Again, I jumped up and rushed around the room to check, but no one was there. The air was thick, as if a layer of cold mist was covering me. I began to doubt if I lost my mind after the events of my life. But what reason can explain that this house knew my name before I could introduce it to anyone? The following days, the situation got worse. I often saw shadows at the end of the hallway or standing silently in the mirror. They only appeared for a brief moment and then disappeared, but left an extremely creepy feeling. At night, the window opened by itself. The wind howled into the room as if wanting to push me out. I began to wonder if I was really the first owner of this house, because every trace showed that someone had lived here, or was even still present somewhere. One night, when the rain started to patter on the roof, I heard a clear voice right next to my ear. It was no longer a whisper, but a complete sentence. "We know, Daniel." I was cold. Every muscle in my body froze. I turned on the light and searched everywhere, but the room was still empty. The yellow light only made the darkness thicker. I realized that this was not just a simple house. This was a place that contained a terrible secret, and it chose me as its next prey. The question still lingers in my mind. Am I really the first person to set foot in this house, or am I an innocent person walking into a preset trap? From the moment I heard my name called, I knew my life would never be normal again. This was just the beginning of one of the scariest horror stories I have ever experienced. After the first night of haunting, I tried to convince myself it was all my imagination, but the fear kept clinging to me and wouldn't let go. Then the second night came. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the house was breathing with me, and every breath wanted to swallow my soul. I sat in the living room. The dim light cast long shadows on the old wooden floor. The cold crept everywhere, as if someone's breath was blowing on the back of my neck. I started to hear a small rustling sound from inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the tiles, and my heart stopped when I clearly heard a long whisper, "Daniel, Daniel." My name echoed in the dark space of the wall. I backed away on trembling legs. All I could see was a smooth wall with no signs of life, but the sound still seeped through the cracks of the tiles. When I tried to ignore it, the sound became louder, as if the voice was angry at being ignored. The whispers overlapped, as if several people were talking at once. They not only called my name, but also giggled like a cruel joke. The creepy sound forced me to leave the room. I ran upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and sat down on the floor with my back against the wall. But the nightmare didn't stop as I leaned back. I clearly felt cold fingers touching me from the other side of the wall. He screamed and rushed out of the room, turning on all the lights in the house. The light filled every corner, but did not bring safety. On the mirror in the living room once again appeared blurred lines of words. Each line was shaky but clear. "We are here with you." I stood there. My body numbed. The air seemed to freeze. I shouted, asking who was there, but only an empty echo answered. The next day, I went back to see the old neighbor. I forced her to tell the truth. She avoided my bewildered eyes and shook her head, then whispered that I should leave the house before it was too late. I asked why. She just said that house was never really empty, and then she slammed the door, leaving me in the cold confusion. The third night passed even worse. I heard footsteps in the hallways. I heard doors opening and closing. I heard chairs being pulled out in the kitchen. I knew I wasn't alone in this house anymore. I decided to record to prove what was going on. I put a small tape recorder in the living room to stay overnight. The next morning, when I listened to it again, I almost dropped it. As soon as I turned off the lights to go to bed, the tape started to record. Footsteps slowly stopping next to the recorder. A hoarse voice rang out clearly, "Daniel, we miss." We shivered and threw the tape to the ground. I could no longer find any reasonable explanation. The ghost stories I once considered a joke were now present in my own house. I began to realize I was surrounded by invisible entities that no one could help. Every day I lived in a state of extreme stress. Windows opened by themselves at night, furniture moved from their original positions, and sometimes I heard crying in the bathroom when no one was there. I tried to call the real estate company to ask for more information about the house, but the broker initially seemed suddenly, then hung up in a hurry. No one wanted to tell me the truth. I started searching the city library for old documents, hoping to find clues, and I discovered something that made my heart cold. My house was not newly built, as they said. It was rebuilt on the ground of an old house that had burned down many years before, in that year's fire. An entire family died, and the name Daniel, coincidentally, was the name of the father who died in that house when I held the old newspaper in my hand. I felt like my blood was freezing. Everything began to make sense. Voices, whispers, fleeting shadows, all was not imagination. They were here. They remembered the name. They called, and they considered me as the continuation of the death of the past. I shivered to realize that I was not the first owner of this house. I was just the next in a never-ending series of tragedies. That night, when I returned home, I walked into the living room where the lines had appeared. I whispered that I knew the truth immediately. The light bulb blinked. The laughter rang out everywhere, a creepy, distorted sound. I understood that from now on, I had become a part of the ghost stories of this very house, and there would be no easy way out for me. Since I learned the truth about the fire years ago, I couldn't sit still anymore. I went back to the library to look for everything related to this land, and then I discovered an old file hidden in a rotten drawer. The yellowed newspaper described in detail the tragedy that happened on a stormy night nearly half a century ago. A fierce fire broke out in the old wooden house, burning everything and taking the lives of a family of 5. The father, named Daniel, his wife and 3 children could not escape. People said that they heard screams in the dark night, but when they arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. No one dared to enter because of the fierce fire and the screams echoing from inside. That land was later abandoned for many years. No one dared to go near it until a construction company decided to level it and build the current house. This is the house I live in now. Reading this, I felt my skin turn cold. I understood that the name Daniel was not a coincidence. This house was once there was a boss with the same name as me, and now the trapped souls are coming to me as an extension of the tragedy. They refuse to leave me alone because they see me as part of their unfinished fate. That night, when I brought the old documents home, the nightmare continued to haunt me. I left the file on the table and tried to sleep, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of a soft turning of paper. Someone was reading each page of the newspaper in a deep, hoarse voice. I turned on the light to the empty room, but the file was in disarray. The pages were scattered all over the floor. Each sheet had fresh scorch marks, as if it had been licked by fire. Children's laughter echoed from the hallway. I shakily walked out and saw a small ball rolling on the wooden floor. That shadow did not belong to me. I crouched down, breathing heavily, then suddenly realized there were charcoal scribbles on the wall. It was a picture of a burning house with distorted faces inside. The shaky writing underneath was only one line: "We never left." I searched how to call a local priest for help. He came on a cloudy afternoon. He held a cross and a bottle of holy water and walked into the house praying. I followed every move, hoping the religious light would bring peace. But as soon as he raised the cross, the atmosphere in the living room suddenly changed. A strong wind came from somewhere and extinguished all the lights. The candle on the table burned fiercely and then went out. The priest trembled and stepped back and said that there was a fierce power that refused to leave this place. I begged him for help, but he just shook his head and said that the trapped souls were not simply demons, but people with so much pain that nothing could drive them away unless the truth was revealed and justice was established. He left me alone in the increasingly gloomy house. After that night, I started to have the same dream over and over. I saw the old house on fire. I heard a man screaming and calling out the names of his children. I saw the silhouette of a woman hugging the children tightly in the sea of fire. And finally, I saw a man turn back to look at me with eyes burning with both despair and anger. That man looked surprisingly like me, and I understood that he was the former Daniel who died in the fire. The dream made me wake up with my body drenched in sweat. I began to feel like I was living with the dead. They wouldn't let me rest because they wanted me to remember. They wanted me to become them. The house gradually appeared before my eyes. Not just for wooden walls, but a door opening to the world of never-ending wailing. Warning, I walked around the backyard and accidentally discovered a low ground covered with grass. I dug and realized there were pieces of burnt bricks lying underneath, along with small pieces of bones. I was stunned when I realized I had just touched the last vestiges of that family. This land was their grave, and the current house was just a shell for a never-ending obsession. I knelt down and silently said, I was sorry, but at that moment, a cold air enveloping me. In a flash, I heard the cry of a child right behind me. When I turned around, all was empty space, but the little ball from the day before appeared again, rolling towards my feet. I understood that these spirits did not want pity, they wanted justice. They wanted the truth to be known, and they wanted me to stay and witness the haunted stories I once thought were just rumors, and now the daily reality. I have to live, I cannot leave, because every time I think about leaving the house behind, the dream of the fire appears more intense. As a warning that I am bound, I realize my life now belongs here, and I have only entered the beginning of the untold horror. After finding the scorched remains in the backyard, I no longer considered this house a place to live, but rather a door connecting to worlds. Every night, I heard sounds that made my blood run cold, especially the footsteps echoing on the wooden floor that stretched throughout the hallway. They were slow and heavy, as if someone was walking around in the dark. But when I opened the door and looked out into the hallway, there was no one, only deathly silence. Footsteps not only sounded at night, but sometimes also in the afternoon when the sunset fell. They always stopped right in front of my room door, as if someone was standing outside, listening to my every breath. I tried putting some powder on the floor to see if there were any traces, but the next morning I only saw small footprints mixed with larger footprints, as if a family was walking in this very house. I no longer dared to turn off the lights when I slept. The yellow light from the old bulb kept flickering as if it was about to go out. I lay there, tossing and turning, thinking, listening to every little sound. On many nights I still heard whispers calling my name right next to my ear, the giggles of children from the corner of the room, and sometimes the sobbing of a woman. Those sounds made me understand that this house did not want me to leave. One rainy night, I heard the steady dripping of water from the upper floor. Even though I was sure the roof was not leaking, I still went up to check. When I opened the door of the upstairs room, I was stunned to see the floor was soaked, and there was a puddle of black water that smelled like burning smoke. From that puddle reflected the face of a strange man with fierce eyes staring at me. I backed away in panic, but when I blinked, the image disappeared, leaving only the dry wooden floor. I started to write down each phenomenon to prove that I was not paranoid. Each page of the diary clearly recorded the moment I heard or saw something, but the more I wrote, the more I felt like the words were not just mine. Once, when I opened the notebook, I saw sentences I had never written, like, "They won't let you go, and we still here with you." The scribbled lines, as if written in haste, in the dark. I decided to try leaving the house for a few days to rest. I went to stay at a friend's house in the city. But on the first night in the new place, I still heard footsteps around the bed. I still felt the cold air on the back of my neck. I opened my eyes to see the shadow of the house appearing in the corner of the room. Like a black stain, I understood I had brought them with me and could not leave them. The following nights, the nightmares became more intense. I found myself being pulled back into the hallway of the dark house, and the footsteps still circling around me, never stopping. I heard the slow, steady knocking like a funeral drum echoing through the four walls. Every time I tried to cover my ears, the sound became louder, as if it wanted to pierce my head. I began to be exhausted, both physically and mentally. The house was no longer simply a place to live. It had become a living entity, always watching and hunting me. Dark shadows moved in my line of sight. Every time I turned my head, the never-ending whispers and the invisible footsteps, near and far, were choking my last bit of sanity. I felt like I was slowly disappearing from this world, and instead there was only the name Daniel echoing in the cold house. One evening, as I sat huddled in the corner of the room, the lights went out at the same time. The hallway was pitch black, but the footsteps echoed loudly approaching my room. I screamed, but the sound faded into the endless void. The door to the room slowly opened, even though I had locked it from the inside. I trembled as the darkness poured in, like a wave swallowing everything I knew. I had stepped deeper into one of those never-ending scary stories. After the bedroom door opened by itself, I completely lost control of myself. I tried to stay calm, but the truth was that I just wanted to run away from that house. The next day, I left early in the morning, but all day at work. My mind was still reeling with the sounds and images of the night before. When I returned to the house, I felt like I had entered another world where everything no longer followed normal rules. I started to pay attention to the long hallway leading from the living room to the stairs. Every night when I passed by, I saw that the weak yellow light was not enough to illuminate everything. There were deep, dark spaces that seemed to swallow my vision. I often saw a black shadow looming at the end of the hallway. They stood still for only a few seconds and then disappeared, leaving a scary void. I blinked many times to check, but that image was still there, making me shiver. Once, I stopped in the middle of the hallway and realized there was a breathing sound right behind me. When I turned around, there was no one, but the light on the ceiling was flickering as if it was about to turn off. I stood still, not daring to take another step until the light stabilized again. Then I discovered that there were long black handprints on the wall, as if someone had just touched them. I tried to wipe them off with a towel, but the marks did not disappear. On the contrary, they spread wider. The following nights, the house revealed its more and more monstrous nature. The furniture moved automatically, as if someone had dragged it on the floor. The mirror in the bathroom was always opaque, and when I wiped it clean, the image of a man standing behind me appeared. But when I turned around, there was no one there. I started to lose sleep, just lying still on the bed, listening to the smallest noises, as if at any moment something would appear right next to me. One night, I decided to try to step into the dark area at the end of the hallway where I often saw a shadow looming. When I got closer, I felt the air was thick and cold, as if there was an invisible fog covering it. I reached out to touch it, and clearly felt another hand grabbing my hand and squeezing it tightly. I panicked and pulled my hand back, but that thing pulled hard, causing me to fall to the floor. I struggled to get up and run back to my room, but the feeling of the cold hand was still there, imprinted on my skin. After that incident, I gradually saw strange images everywhere, not only in the house but also when I went out. I saw a shadow standing still under a tree, watching me for hours. I saw a strange face smiling behind me in the car's rearview mirror, then disappearing when I got back to the back seat. All of this made me gradually lose my concept of reality. I no longer knew if I was awake or dreaming. One evening, when I was sitting in the living room, whispers began to echo from the familiar wall. My name repeated dozens of times. The voices of men, women, old and young, mixed together like a ghostly choir. I shouted loudly to tell them to be quiet, but immediately the doors in the house slammed shut at the same time, creating a resounding sound that made me feel suffocated. When I tried to open the window, I saw that outside was pitch black, no longer the lights of the city. I turned my head and saw silhouettes standing crowded all over the hallway. Their eyes were deep black holes, their mouths wide open, but no sound came out. I was stunned and fell down. And when I looked up then, everything disappeared, and only the house was silent, but the cold and the smell of burning still clung to the air as a reminder that I was not alone. I started writing down these experiences to keep myself from going crazy. I know no one will believe me if they don't see it with their own eyes, but I hope that somehow I can find a clue to escape this terrifying cycle. The house didn't just haunt me, it wanted to take me over and make me a part of its world. The sighs, the shadows, and invisible hands were just the beginning. I know that what lies ahead is much creepier. After several nights of being haunted, I decided to dig deeper into the history of this land. I returned to the library to read even older documents, and this time I discovered notes that few people paid attention to. There were vague reports of many mysterious deaths that occurred not only during the fire, but also in the decades before. Each generation living on this land left a black mark on history. Before the first wooden house was built, this land used to belong to an old farm. The owner of the farm, William, died suddenly with his wife and children in an accident whose cause was never explained. The people at that time rumored that they were being punished by some force for occupying the land that was considered sacred. They said that there used to be a small cemetery right under the ground, but it was leveled to build a house. From then on, strange deaths began to follow one another. Reading this, I felt a chill down my spine. I began to understand that this house was not only haunted by a family fire, but also by a curse that lasted for hundreds of years. The spirits never rested, and they tried to return through anyone who dared to enter. That night when I returned and sat in the living room, I heard 3 slow knocks echoing through the hallway. I didn't open the door, just sat still listening. But a few seconds later, the papers I brought from the library fell to the floor and spun around as if touched by an invisible hand. One of the old newspapers turned to a page with bold words, "Daniel's family died in a fire right here, and no one dared to enter again." I read that line over and over again like an omen. I started having recurring nightmares every night. In my dream I saw myself walking into an ancient cemetery, but all the tombstones were smashed and the names were erased on the ground. There were bony hands reaching up and grabbing my legs and pulling me down. I struggled in despair, and when I woke up, I still had a heavy feeling on my chest, as if something had just pressed down. One evening, I tried to walk out into the backyard where I dug deeper and discovered a broken stone tablet buried under the damp soil. Although the letters were faded, I could still make out strange ancient characters that didn't belong to any familiar language. As soon as I touched the tablet, a cold air rushed through, and I heard whispers around my ears. Many voices rang out at the same time. "You can't escape." I ran into the house, my heart pounding violently. That night, the house went crazy. The lights kept flashing, the windows opened by themselves, and objects fell everywhere. I sat huddled in the corner of the room and saw a tall figure standing in front of the door. He had no face, just a thick darkness, but from there came a deep voice. "They chose you." From that moment on, I knew I had no way back. The house had locked me in its vortex. I wasn't just living in a haunted house. I was trapped in an ancient curse that continued to swallow my every breath. Every reason to leave became meaningless, because every time I tried to step outside, I heard a call from the wind. Laughter echoing from the hallway, and the silhouettes of my family burning to death, staring at me from the window. I realized that all that I was experiencing was no longer imagination or paranoia. This was one of the most vivid, true, scary stories that I was forced to be the main character. I couldn't escape because even when I left this place, they followed me like a shadow that never disappeared. I began to wonder if the end of this story would be my destruction like those who came before me. After discovering the broken stone tablet, I had no doubt that this place was a trap for trapped souls. But the haunting did not stop there. It began to appear more clearly in every familiar object that I used every day. And the most terrible thing was the mirrors. At first, I only saw blurry spots like steam covering the mirror surface. But when I wiped them clean, they did not disappear, but gradually formed the image of a strange face. Looking closely, I saw a man with messy hair and white eyes standing right behind me. I turned around and saw no one, but when I looked back at the mirror, that face was still there, looking straight at me as if it wanted to penetrate my soul. I started testing to make sure I was not hallucinating. I placed a small camera in front of the mirror in the bedroom to record every movement. The next morning, when I reviewed the tape, I clearly saw the silhouette of a woman standing still right next to the bed while I was sleeping. That silhouette did not appear in reality, but the lens recorded every second and minute. I trembled and threw the camera into the corner of the room because knowing that I have no way to deny anymore, this house uses mirrors as doors to let souls into my world. Every time I walk through the bathroom, I see many faces pressed against the mirror as if trying to escape. There are children smiling with crooked smiles. There is a man with burns all over his face. And there is my own image, but my face is twisted, as if I have been dead for a long time. Sleepless nights become torture. I try to cover the mirror with towels, but every time I wake up, they are pulled down to the ground. One night I wake up and see the mirror in the room reflecting me sleeping peacefully, but right next to the bed is a family of 5 sitting and staring at me without blinking. Their eyes are empty but filled with resentment. Realize it is Daniel's family from back then. The wife and 3 children died in the fire. They appear quietly through the mirror as if to remind me that I have replaced their place in this house. I try to say sorry, but my voice is weak, and when I look back in the mirror, I am the only one left, me with a scared face. I went to a paranormal researcher to ask for advice. After hearing the story, he immediately said that mirrors are a conductor connecting to worlds. If in a place that is strongly haunted, like my house, mirrors will become an open door for souls to appear. He warned that if I continue to live in it, I will gradually lose myself and be replaced by souls that long to return. I left the meeting with a heavy heart because I knew I was getting closer to the edge that night. I tried not to look at any mirrors, but it was useless because no matter how I avoided them, they still found a way to appear. I saw my reflection right in the glass door, in the light bulb, on the phone screen, and everything was distorted and deformed like a dead version of me. When I closed my eyes to avoid them, in my head echoed the laughter of children and the heart-rending screams of that manor. Moment later, I opened my eyes and saw the large mirror in the living room cracking open with long cracks like a spider web. A groan came from the mirror, and a bony hand reached out to touch the air, screamed loudly, and ran out of the room, but still felt the gazes from dozens of faces in the mirror following me. Every step I took was like being dragged down by dozens of ghosts. Understood that the house no longer wanted me to be just a witness. It wanted to swallow me whole and turn me into a part of the terrifying images in the mirror. Every warning only proved that I had gone too far to turn back. Was no longer in control of my fate. Could only wait for the moment the mirror reflected not me, but someone completely different, and that was when I realized I was living in one of those haunted stories that never ended. The house had decided my role, and I was just a replacement to continue the tragic story that had been written decades ago. After the mirrors started to crack, I didn't have the courage to go around the house anymore. I just stayed in a few rooms that were lit. But that didn't make me safer. Darkness gradually crept into every corner, as if the house had consciousness, and was shrinking my world. One night, when I tried to sleep, I dreamed I was standing in the house, but it was completely empty, with no furniture, only blackened walls. I heard footsteps of many people running around screaming, and the smell of smoke was suffocating. I ran for an exit, but the hallway just kept going on and on, never leading to the main door. When I looked back, a huge fire was coming towards me, with the silhouette of a charred man walking slowly behind him. His empty eyes were staring straight at me. Woke up, sweating all over my body, but when I opened my eyes, I still saw that black figure standing in the corner of the room. I screamed loudly and blinked repeatedly to convince myself that I was still awake, but the black figure didn't disappear. It was coming towards me, and only when I turned on all the lights and everything disappeared. But the scorched footprints were still imprinted on the floor as undeniable evidence. The following days I completely lost the concept of time. Day and night passed in a state of fear. I ate and drank carelessly just to survive, and my eyes were always red from lack of sleep. I tried to call a few friends, but every time they heard my trembling voice, they thought I was psychologically haunted. No one believed the story. I was left alone with the house and the souls that never rested. One night, I was sitting writing my diary when the lights suddenly went out and the whole house was plunged into darkness. I heard the sound of children giggling right next to my ear, and when I turned around, I saw 3 small shadows running through the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard, I turned on the flashlight to look at them and was shocked to realize that they were 3 children with tattered clothes and scorched faces. They stopped and looked at me with sad and resentful eyes, and then disappeared into thin air. I collapsed on the floor, feeling cold all over. I tried to pray aloud, reading the words of the Bible that I remembered, but the sound was drowned out by the pounding of knocking from everywhere. The knocking came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the wooden floor, as if the whole house had turned into a funeral drum. I was surrounded by the sound until I could no longer stand. I collapsed and lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found myself in the middle of the living room, but I had no memory of how I got there. On the wall, scribbled lines written in black charcoal. "We need you. We want you." I shuddered and stepped back, but behind me, similar lines covered the wall. I was trapped in a circle of deadly messages with no way out. I began to understand that the house didn't just want to scare me, it wanted to possess me. It wanted me to become a part of it, to continue the unfinished tragedy. The faces in the mirror, the footsteps, the laughter and tears, all were meant to push me to the brink of despair. When I could no longer resist, I would become one with them. Another night when I tried to open the door to run out and found that the scenery outside was no longer the same. The familiar street had disappeared, replaced by a burnt-out empty lot and a sky as red as hellfire. There was no sound except the howling wind and the wailing cry. I realized that the house had swallowed the real world, turning it into a separate space where only pain and death existed. I turned back to look at the door behind me and saw the house still standing there, dark and heavy, like a giant creature breathing slowly. I understood that I had no choice. I had stepped into one of those true horror stories that only death could close. The house gradually revealed its strange nature. I began to hear voices coming from the walls as if people were talking behind the thin bricks. Male and female voices mixed together, creating an endless murmuring sound. At first, I couldn't understand the content, but gradually they became clearer. They mentioned my name over and over again like a ghostly incantation. I tried to cover my ears, but the whispering still penetrated my head without decreasing. Sometimes it turned into a shrill laugh or a sob. I felt as if each wall had its own soul, talking to each other with a never-ending resentment. The house was no longer a shelter, but a living being that swallowed my sanity day by day. One night, I decided to try to walk all the way down the hallway to check the doors that were still closed. I turned on the flashlight and walked step by step, but the more I walked, the hallway seemed to stretch out endlessly. I walked forever and never reached the end of the row, only to see the same doors repeating over and over again. When I opened a door, I saw that the inside was not a room. Normal, but a dark void in which there were bright eyes staring at me. I panicked and slammed it shut, but when I turned back, the hallway had completely changed. I felt like I was being taken into a living maze. Ran for my life, hoping to find the stairs, but every turn led to a dead-end wall or doors that opened into empty space. The footsteps echoed behind me, getting closer and closer, as if someone was chasing me. I was breathing heavily, my legs were shaking until I collapsed to the floor. When I looked up, I realized I was right in front of the original bedroom door, although I didn't understand what had happened. I knew the house had played with me like a hunted prey. In the following days, I hardly dared to step out of my bedroom, but even that place wasn't safe. Many times I woke up in the night and saw the door slowly opening, even though I had locked it from the inside. The dim light in the hallway reflected the silhouettes of people standing motionless. They didn't enter, just stood there, watching, making me suck. Time I found myself being pulled out of bed when sleeping. I opened my eyes to see the room spinning around, and the scorched faces of the children passing through the air. I screamed in despair and passed out. When I woke up, I was still in bed, but the bruises on my arms and legs were clear evidence that I had actually been touched. I tried to call for help by letting my phone record. In the night, the next morning, when I watched the recording, I felt a chill down my spine because I clearly saw a dark figure standing at the head of my bed, staring at me for hours. It didn't move, just stood there like a guard. Right after that, the camera turned off. Even though the battery was full, I threw my phone aside because I didn't want to witness any more. The creepy stories I had heard about turned out not to be exaggerated. I was living in them, and every day was a new, more terrifying chapter. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and no longer had any faith that I could escape. The house had become an invisible trap that imprisoned my soul, and every time darkness fell, I knew I would be led back into its maze. It became clearer and clearer to me that the end was approaching. Everything around, I'm just a plaything of the ghosts who never left this place, and soon I'll be a part of the creepy stories buried in this house of the dead. The house started to play with me with doors. I realized that none of the doors led to the same room anymore. One evening, I tried to open the kitchen door, but instead of the familiar kitchen, I saw a long, dark hallway with no end. I closed the door, trembling, but when I opened it again, the kitchen was gone. Only the darkness stretched on endlessly. I tried opening other rooms, and the result was the same. Sometimes it was empty space, sometimes it was the image of the house itself, but distorted, as if I was being pulled into another dimension where ghosts took control. I panicked and slammed everything shut, but the feeling that the house was laughing echoed around me. One time, I boldly stepped into the room that turned into a long hallway. When I took a few steps, I heard footsteps following me. I turned around but only saw the darkness. I ran faster, and the footsteps became more rapid. Just when I thought I would be caught, I opened another door and rushed through, but when the door slammed shut, I found myself still standing in the same place, head in the living room. I began to understand that the house no longer wanted me to find a way out. It built endless mazes to exhaust me. I was trapped in a deadly game, and the more I struggled, the deeper I fell. Doors became a symbol of despair because they only opened a new layer of darkness. For many nights, I was haunted by the incessant knocking. The bedroom door shook violently, as if someone wanted to break in. I tried to block it with furniture, but the knocking became louder. When I shouted loudly to stop, everything stopped. Immediately after that, a child's voice whispered right next to my ear. He had opened the door. I looked around and saw no one, but the door slowly opened, even though I had locked it tightly. I gradually realized that the short, scary stories that I thought only existed in books were now happening every day in my own life. Not a short story, but a long nightmare. I had become the reluctant protagonist and had no way to escape. Another time, when I went down to the basement, I saw the door behind me close by itself. I turned on the flashlight and saw the dark room gradually change. The walls curved as if to swallow me. From the darkness appeared black hands reaching out to touch my shirt. I ran up the stairs, but the stairs seemed to be endless. I screamed in despair until I passed out. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the bed as if I had never left the room, but the traces of dirt on my shoes and scratches on my hands were clear evidence that I had actually gone down to the basement. I sat silently for hours, not daring to move, and could only pray for something that could free me from this terrifying loop. Understood that the house had taken complete control of space and time. I no longer knew where I was, and all the doors were just cruel jokes. I felt like the longer I walked, the deeper I got lost in. The dark floors with no way out. The house had turned me into a puppet, and it had no intention of letting go. The only question in my mind at this moment was whether there was any way out, or what my end would be, just one of the many names buried in the darkness of this house. Another short, scary story will be added to the endless list that it has swallowed up over the years. After long nights with deformed doors, I began to notice other strange phenomena happening throughout the house. They were no longer just footsteps or shadows, but events that could not be explained by reason. I saw objects moving without any hands touching them. The living room furniture moved a few inches each time I turned away and then back. The ceiling light oscillated as if someone was pulling a string, while all the windows were closed. One evening, while I was writing in my diary, I heard a loud banging sound on the attic floor. I ran upstairs to check and saw the window was blown open, the wind howling in, making the curtains flutter. But the scary thing was that the heavy wooden table in the bedroom automatically slid and blocked the window, as if someone was deliberately holding it. Before I could regain my composure, I heard a childish laugh echo throughout the room. I rushed outside, my heart pounding as if it were about to explode. In the following days, strange phenomena happened more frequently. I poured water into a glass and saw the glass crack in half right before my eyes. I turned on the radio and it made a sound like whispering strangely in a language other than English. I turned on the TV and the screen showed me sleeping in my room from an angle that didn't have any cameras in my house. I felt like I was being watched every second, and the truth was that I had no privacy anymore. The climax was on a rainy night when I heard someone calling my name from the basement. The hoarse voice seemed to come from underground. I held a flashlight and trembled down to check. When I just touched the last step, I saw the dark room lit up by a dim blue light coming from the wall. In that light appeared a series of distorted faces imprinted on the wall. The faces opened their eyes and mouths silently, as if they were trapped forever. I panicked and turned back up, but the basement door had disappeared, leaving only a cold wall in front of me. I screamed loudly, begging to be let out, and immediately the blue light went out. I collapsed to the ground. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the bed, as if I had never left. Those phenomena made me wonder if I was still living in the real world or had strayed to another dimension. I can't tell anymore. I go out on the street, but people look at me differently, as if I'm not really there, as if they only see a shadow. I touch a passerby's hand, but they don't react. I'm stunned to realize that I may have been pulled into the other world one day. While sitting in the living room, I saw books fall off the shelf, floating in the air and falling to the floor. Opened to the pages about trapped souls, I skimmed through and saw the red writing added, "We are here with you." I threw the book away, but it returned to the table as if sucked by an invisible force. I knew I didn't have time anymore. The supernatural phenomena were getting stronger, as if the house was slowly swallowing me. From vague sounds to shadows to the distortion of space, the house had gone beyond all limits. I was just a lost survivor in its game. That night, when I stood in front of the mirror, I saw clearly that I no longer reflected projecting the image of a normal person anymore. My face blurred behind the mist and gradually turned into the face of the burnt man from years ago. He looked at me with a grim smile. I stepped back, but the image in the mirror still approached. I realized that I was being replaced little by little. House had turned me into its center, turning me into a witness and a victim at the same time. I don't know how long I can resist, but I know one thing for sure. This is one of the paranormal stories that is not just a legend, but a living truth I am enduring every day and every hour. The supernatural phenomena became more and more strange, as if the house had learned to turn my fear into vivid footage. I not only heard sounds, not only saw fleeting figures, but also began to witness clear scenes, as if watching a horror movie, appear right before my eyes. One evening, while sitting in the living room, I saw the opposite wall gradually turn into a giant screen. On it was shown the scene of the fire that burned down the house years ago. I saw Daniel's family trapped inside. Screaming in despair, I wanted to turn away, but my legs were stiff as if nailed to the floor. The red fire flared up fiercely. The heat hit my face. I raised my hand to shield, but when I lowered my hand, the scene had disappeared, leaving only the old cracked wall. The following days, this phenomenon continued. I saw the hallway in front of me suddenly stretched out for miles, where shadows of people walked past with distorted faces. I saw the kitchen turned into a battlefield of fire and smoke, with burnt faces staring at me. It all happened like a moment the movie was playing over and over again, and I was the only one forced to watch it endlessly. One night, when I tried to sleep, I dreamed that I walked into an empty room, but on the wall appeared children's scribbles. They started moving their drawings all over the wall, forming little figures, holding hands and dancing. The children's laughter rang out loudly, but became more and more distorted into a terrifying scream. I woke up in a cold sweat, but when I opened my eyes, the drawings were still on my room's wall, as if the dream had come to life. Tried to close my eyes and pray, but the sound echoed in my head, like a movie that never stopped. I heard an old man's voice whispering how he burned to death in his house. I heard a woman calling out her child's name in despair. I saw all the horrible memories replayed before my eyes, endlessly another time. I walked into the bathroom and saw the mirror turned into a screen. It showed me sleeping, but there was a dark figure standing at the head of the bed, holding a rusty knife. I panicked and turned back to look at the bed. I didn't see anything. But when I looked back in the mirror, the scene continued as if I was watching a horror animation of my own fate. I smashed the mirror, but as the pieces fell, they continued to project the scene on each piece. The house had turned into a giant cinema where everything operated according to its own rules. It used my memories, my fears and my dreams to create vivid animations that left me exhausted. I no longer knew where the line between reality and fantasy was. I began to think I was living in an endless horror movie where the only audience was me. Another night, when I was trying to write in my diary, I saw each letter on the paper automatically dance to form a human figure. They climbed up the table and ran around, then merged into a smoky ghost, reaching out to touch me. I was terrified and tore the notebook to shreds, but from the pieces of paper that fell to the floor appeared moving images that continued to haunt me. I understood that the house would not stop. It wanted to make me the main character in its endless series of animated horror stories. Then I knew the terrible thing: the worst is yet to come. The house has many scenes yet to be revealed, and I am just a helpless person watching until the last moment, when the screen goes dark and my life disappears with it. The more I live in this house, the more I realize that silence is scarier than noise. The nights when I'm alone in the darkness, the silence covers the whole house, but does not bring safety. I know clearly that I'm not alone. Every time I close my eyes, I feel dozens of invisible eyes watching me. It's like I'm being observed in a terrifying experiment. One night, I intentionally turned off all the lights to test if the light is making me paranoid. I sat in the middle of the living room in complete darkness, only hearing my heart pounding. At first, nothing happened, but a few minutes later, I heard a sigh right next to my ear. I turned my head and there was no one, just a cold space. That coldness seemed to penetrate straight into my skin, making my whole body crawl. I turned the lights back on and realized that the chair opposite had just moved a few inches, as if someone had just sat down. The feeling of being stuck in the game of Home Alone was scarier than ever. I backed away, but the chair moved even more, as if to confirm the invisible presence of another person. In the room in the days that followed, every familiar object became a threat. I opened the refrigerator and saw faint handprints on the door. I turned on the TV and the screen only showed me sitting there staring at myself, but behind me was a faint silhouette of someone. I got up and checked around, but found nothing. One night, I sat in my office trying to concentrate on writing my diary. I heard the clicking of the keyboard, but when I looked down, my hands weren't typing. An invisible force was writing for me. The lines appeared slowly. He was never really alone. I shuddered and let go of the pen, but the keyboard continued to type as if controlled by an invisible hand. As time went on, the silence in the house became more and more oppressive. I tried to turn the music up loud to drown it out, but the speakers emitted whispers instead of melodies. I turned it down and the sound turned into a baby's prolonged cry. The house turned all my efforts into failures, forcing me to face the fact that I was never really alone. Another night, I slept in the living room so I wouldn't feel trapped within the four walls. I placed the chair in the middle of the room, turned on the dim nightlight, and lay down. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, I saw that all the chairs and tables had been pulled into a circle around me like a strange ritual. In the middle of the circle, I was turned into the center of invisible eyes, watching. I screamed and rushed to the door, but when I opened the main door, I only saw a wall blocking my way in front of me. There were no more streets, no more sky, only emptiness. I closed the door, my heart pounding, knowing that I was completely trapped in the private world of the house. The feeling of being home, alone, now became a torture. I no longer believed that there was day or night. I could only sit in the corner of the house, listening to the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks of the door, mixed with whispers calling my name. The house had taken over every concept of loneliness, turning it into a weapon to erode my soul. And I knew clearly that this was no longer a fantasy. This was a horrifying reality that I was forced to live every second and every minute. An experience of home alone that no one wanted and would never have an ending. The first rainy night I stayed in the house was an unforgettable experience. At first, the sound of rain falling on the tiled roof sounded like a lullaby. But as the night wore on, I realized it was no longer normal. The sound of rain pouring down like steady footsteps echoed throughout the hallway. Each drop falling on the roof made a knocking sound like a hand knocking on the door. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening to each beat of rain mixed with a soft whisper. I jumped up and shined a flashlight outside the window. The water droplets running down the glass formed a shape like someone's hand sliding down. It felt like someone was standing outside in the rain, using their cold, wet hands to press against the glass, preventing me from escaping. I backed away, but from the corner of the room came the murmur of many voices blending together to the rhythm of the rain. The voices of men, women, and children intertwined into a ghostly chord. A moment later, the sound of rain stopped falling and turned into the sound of heavy footsteps from the roof, stretching along each step. I ran down to the living room and tried to turn on all the lights, but the light only made the room more blurry. Walls and the floor was soaked with water even though there was no leak on the floor. Small puddles of water gradually spread out, forming the shape of a person lying still. I could clearly see the long, wet hair and the white eyes staring at me. I screamed and backed away, but the puddles disappeared immediately, leaving the floor dry as if nothing had happened. My heart was pounding, cold sweat pouring out. I tried to convince myself that it was just an illusion, but the sound of the rain continued to ring in my head like a deathly song that could not be stopped. The following rainy nights were even worse. Every time the rain started to fall, I heard the sound of children running and jumping on the roof. Their laughter echoed, blending with the sound of the rain like a distorted chorus. One night, I saw a black shadow on the wall moving with each falling drop of water. It seemed that the spirits in the house used the sound of the rain to awaken their presence. Another night, when I tried to sleep through the pouring rain, I heard a knock on the door 3 times in a row. I didn't open it, but the door swung open by itself. A cold wind blew in, along with the smell of burning smoke. In the flash of lightning, I clearly saw the silhouette of a family standing right in front of the door. Their eyes were empty and their bodies were soaked as if they had just stepped out of a fierce rain. I collapsed, and when I looked up, there was only the door banging against the wall. I began to realize that the rain was the catalyst that brought this house to life. Each raindrop seemed to awaken buried memories and lead the souls back. I no longer hoped for rain to bring peace, but only feared when I saw dark clouds coming, because I knew that once the rain sounds rang out, again I would continue to sink into a never-ending chain of nightmares. House not only imprisoned me with darkness, but also used nature to assert its control. I could no longer distinguish between the sound of real rain, footsteps, or whispers, all blended into a deadly song that enveloped me every long night, and I understood that each rain only brought me deeper into my own collapse. The normal rain sounds had turned into eternal haunting for one who can never live in peace in the human world again. After the rains of the night passed, I thought I would at least get some rest, but no, the house had a new way of tormenting me. I began to realize that all the events I experienced had something in common with the stories that were circulating all over the internet, scary short stories that people often call creepypasta. First, I didn't pay much attention, but when I saw the lines of writing on the wall in black charcoal, I was stunned, because the content was no different from an excerpt. I had read somewhere it described a man haunted by a house that knew his name. I shivered, realizing that I was living that story. I tried to erase the writing, but the next morning there were more of them all over the hallway. One night, when I opened my laptop, I saw the screen pop up, an old forum with the title Untold Stories. I tried to turn it off, but the mouse cursor automatically moved to the link. When the screen lit up, I saw a series of posts detailing what I was experiencing every night. From the whispering rain to the shadow in the mirror, there was even a post named Daniel and the house that knows everything. I was cold, because no one but me knew those things. The more I read, the more I felt like someone had written the script of my life, and I was just the helpless protagonist trapped in this story. I tried to check the posting date and found that it was posted many years ago, long before I moved into the house. It broke me down because it proved that my fate had been predetermined long ago. The next night, I heard the sound of a keyboard clicking in the office. When I walked in, I saw the computer screen light up, showing the lines being typed. Daniel, it was time to finish the story. I panicked and pulled the plug, but the computer kept running. The lines of text stretched endlessly, turning into horror stories I had seen circulating online. When I looked around the room, the walls were covered with printed papers, with pictures of me surrounded by ghosts. I tried to tear them off, but they grew more like vines wrapped tightly around me. I collapsed on the floor, gasping in despair. I began to understand that this house not only wanted to keep my soul, but also wanted to turn my fear into a story to be passed on. It wanted to spread the horror beyond the four walls, turning everything into a living legend. People would tell of me as a newly woven creepypasta, and I would be trapped in there forever. Another night I woke up and found myself lying in a room full of mirrors. Each mirror showed me dying in different ways. Some showed me being burned in fire, some showed me being drowned in black water, and all ended with a line appearing on the mirror. "This is Daniel's story," I screamed, but my voice only echoed like an endless looping recording. The house was turning me into an unwilling horror legend. Each terrifying experience no longer belonged to me, but became stories spread everywhere like a curse. Other creepypastas were just fiction, but mine was living real. Every day and night I knew that even if I survived and escaped to the world, people won't believe it. They'll just see it as a story to entertain a creepy piece of news on the internet. But for me, this is the harsh truth, a truth I can't escape. And then I realized that my fate was tied to this house. I wasn't just haunted. I was turned into a symbol for one of the most terrifying creepypastas that ever existed. After weeks of being haunted by the house, I thought that if I left for a while, I could find peace again. I decided to go into the forest to set up camp overnight, where there was no sign of a house, no whispers from the walls or cracked mirrors. I prepared a tent, some food and water, and brought a flashlight, hoping that the night in nature would be different. I told myself that this camping trip would be a way for me to find myself again. At first, everything seemed fine. The evening light filtered through the forest canopy, creating a peaceful scene. I set up a tent near a small stream and lit a campfire. Watching the fire flicker, I felt somewhat more comfortable breathing. The crackling sound from the dry wood made me forget some of the haunting memories. I sat there, eating a few dry cakes and thinking that I had finally escaped. However, when the darkness covered the forest, I realized that the silence here was equally terrifying. There was only the sound of wind blowing through the leaves and the sound of running water. But the more I listened, the more I felt another sound echoing in the darkness. At first, it was just the sound of footsteps gently stepping on dry leaves, I thought. It might be wild animals, but when the flashlight was turned on, there was no sign of any animal, just empty space. And the mist gradually thinned out. The footsteps became clearer and clearer, echoing around the tent as if someone was. Circling around, I held my breath and listened. Then suddenly, a childish laughter rang out in the distance, making my heart shake. I knew for sure there couldn't be children in this forest at this hour. I rushed out to shine the lights everywhere, but only saw the grey tree trunks. Standing still, the laughter disappeared, but the leaves still rustled as if someone had just escaped. Returned to the tent, trying to calm down, but when I sat down, I saw my bag had been rummaged through with food scattered all over the floor, as if someone had just rummaged through. I knew I had locked it up beforehand. Panic rose up, so I decided to sit and hug the flashlight, waiting for morning. I didn't dare to sleep, just kept my eyes open to follow every sound. Midnight, the fire went out, even though I had added more wood. I sat in the dark and heard a whisper right next to my ear, calling my name, Daniel. The voice was long, creepy. I swung my flashlight around, but only saw thick fog in the middle of the forest. In the fog, there were a few silhouettes of people standing still. I turned the flashlight to where they disappeared, but the feeling of being watched never left. When it was almost dawn, I saw a handprint imprinted on the tent fabric from the outside. That print was not a normal human hand, but a long, deformed one. I sat there, stunned, until the sun rose. When I opened the tent, I only saw the quiet forest, as if nothing had ever happened. But in my heart, I knew for sure that the spirits from the house had followed me here. The camp trip that I thought would bring peace had turned into a new nightmare. I packed up my things in trembling and left the forest, but all the way back I still heard footsteps following closely behind. Every time I turned back, there were only silent trees, but the feeling of someone following me never disappeared. I understood that I could not escape, no matter where I was. The house and the spirits always came to me, and I realized a horrifying truth, that freedom had no longer exists from now on. Wherever I set foot will become a part of this deadly story. The camping trip was just clear proof that there is no safe place for me in this world. I returned to the house after the haunting camping trip. I thought that being away for a while would calm me down, but in fact, things only got worse. As I walked through the rusty gate, I felt a cold air rush into my chest, as if the house recognized my return and laughed at my helplessness. Everything in the house was still in place, but I noticed something different. The air was heavier, and the darkness seemed thicker. I walked down the hallway and heard a creaking sound under my feet, as if dozens of people were walking with me. I stopped to listen, and from the ceiling came a rhythmic, steady, drum-like knocking sound. I walked into the living room and saw the mirror on the wall had more cracks in it. In the mirror, reflected not only me, but also a series of figures standing crowded behind. Their eyes were hollow, their skin was scorched, and their hands reached out as if to pull me inside. I shivered and turned away, but the sound from the mirror still echoed a whisper. "Daniel, we were waiting for you that night." I tried to sleep in the bedroom, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I felt myself being pulled out of bed. I opened my eyes and still lay still, but felt my whole body being squeezed as if many invisible arms were holding me. I tried to struggle but couldn't move. I clearly heard someone breathing right next to my face. Even though I couldn't see, I knew clearly there was an entity nearby. I tried to scream, but my stiff throat only made a weak sound. When the lights flashed, I saw the room full of people standing around the bed. They didn't move, just stared at me, then disappeared when the light went out. I was exhausted, as if I had just gone through a torture. I realized the house was no longer hiding its intentions. It wanted to completely take over me. The next day I tried to leave, but when I stepped out the main door, I saw in front of me no longer the familiar street, but a burnt, black, smoky land. I turned back and walked in. The scene inside was still the same old house as usual, but now I knew that I was completely locked in this haunted world. No way out, no choice. The next night, I heard sobbing in the kitchen. I trembled as I walked downstairs and saw the table shaking violently, dishes falling and breaking everywhere. A woman's figure appeared briefly and then disappeared, leaving a strong smell of smoke. I stood there, stunned, and understood that the family from back then never left this place. I began to write down what I experienced, not just for myself anymore, but as if to send it to anyone who could read it. I wanted them to know that there are places that should never be entered, because once you touch them, you will not be able to escape. I have become a living witness to one of the most terrifying haunted houses in existence. And as I write these lines, I hear footsteps approaching the door of the room. I know they have come again, and this time I may never escape again. One evening, I groped my way up to the attic, where I had never been. Before, the dusty room was covered with cobwebs. Everywhere the flashlight scanned every dark corner, and I discovered an old wooden box covered by a tattered cloth. Pulled the cloth down and opened the box, and inside were scorched diaries with the edges of the paper still smelling of smoke. I trembled as I turned each page and realized this was the diary of the father of the family who had died in the fire years ago. The writing was scribbled, but still clear, the dates recorded, every detail of their lives. There were lines about the small joys of having dinner together. There were lines about the laughter of children, echoing in the yard, but the later it got darker. He wrote that he had heard whispers in the walls many times, saw a shadow standing still in the mirror, and felt like he was being watched every time he walked in the hallway. He told of recurring dreams of the house on fire that kept him awake. He wrote that his family had wanted to leave but couldn't, because every time I packed my things, strange things happened. From a sudden fire to a near fatal accident. Last page seemed to be written right before the tragedy happened. He wrote, "I know this house wants us to die here. It chose us from the first day we set foot in, and now when I hear the rain falling outside, I know the fire will flare up again if we dare to leave." The last words were written hastily and desperately. "Oh God, please save the children." I finished reading, with my hands shaking, my heart pounding, as if there was a fire burning inside me. I understood that everything I experienced was not just a strange phenomenon, but a continuation of a series of real tragedies. These diary pages are evidence of true stories that have been hidden so that others can accidentally repeat the tragedy. I decided to take the diary down to the living room, but as soon as I stepped out of the attic, I heard the sound of children running around the stairs, their laughter echoing for a long time. I clenched the notebook in my hand and said loudly that I knew the truth, but instead of silence, the house shook violently. The walls cracked in pieces, dust flying everywhere, screams echoed everywhere, like dozens of souls speaking at the same time. I put the notebook down on the table and prayed for them to rest, but each page turned by itself in the wind and stopped at the last line, the trembling writing became clearer. We are still here. I was horrified to realize that they did not want to be freed. They wanted me to continue the story of living in tragedy, like they had that night when I sat looking at the flickering candle next to the notebook. I saw the silhouette of a man in the mirror standing right behind me. He looked at me with eyes full of resentment, as if he wanted me to bear the rest of the curse. As soon as I turned back, there was only darkness, but the heat and smell of smoke still lingered around the room. I understood that finding the diary did not help me escape the truth, but only made me more tightly bound. The written pages had turned into invisible chains, pulling me deeper into the tragic spiral of this house, and I could only wait until it was my turn to leave the diary as evidence of the true stories that never ended. After reading the diary, I began to understand more clearly that these spirits were not looking for liberation. They wanted me to pay for what they had suffered. In every breath, in every sound, I could clearly feel the hatred filling the atmosphere of the house. Each figure appeared not only to scare me, but also to sow punishment. One evening, I sat in the living room. The window was opened, the wind howled, carrying a strong smell of smoke. In the mist, I saw scorched faces, their eyes empty but filled with resentment. They came towards me, shouting in unison, "You will pay." I panicked and ran away, but all the doors slammed shut like an invisible prison. Footsteps echoed behind me, getting closer and closer. I stumbled and looked up to see the shadow of a tall man standing in the way. His whole body was burned black, but his eyes were shining, looking at me with hatred. He raised his hand, and immediately my chest felt as if it was being squeezed. I tried to struggle, but my body was held tight. I heard a whisper. In my head, "We died in pain, and now it's your turn." Next night I saw them again in the mirror, the figure of a woman holding a child with red, burning eyes staring at me. I heard her mournful cry mixed with the sobbing of a child. I understood that they were demanding justice, but not from the one who caused the tragedy, but from me, the unfortunate one who set foot in this place. I became a cruel substitute, sacrifice. Tried to burn the diary, hoping to sever the connection, but when the fire just flared up, the pages did not burn, but only glowed. Red screams echoed from everywhere. In my ears, he could not escape. Threw the notebook down, but it returned to the table where I found it. Originally, as if it had never left the following days, I lived in a state of extreme tension. Footsteps followed me day and night. Sometimes I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder when no one was around. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces rushing to pull me into the fire. I was tired, but did not dare to sleep because I knew that in my sleep, I dream I will be punished. One morning, I saw a new line of writing appear on the wall in a crimson liquid. "We want justice." I stood still, my heart stopped beating. What justice is this when everything has been buried decades ago? I understand that for them, Justice is making me the next one on the list of victims of the house. More I feel like I am no longer myself, I talk. To the darkness I hear answers from the void. I start writing strange lines with my own hand, but I don't remember doing it. When I read it again, I see the oaths of revenge. I shudder to realize I am gradually assimilated into them. Understand that this is the nature of this house. It not only devours innocent souls, but also turns them into tools of revenge to attract more victims, and this time I am the target of that rage. I am living in the most terrible revenge stories that no one can imagine. I know clearly that the end for me is near. I no longer hide. I can only wait and see when the darkness will swallow me up and make me part of the revenge curse in this house of death. I knew that I had reached the end of this story. All attempts to escape were futile. I tried to run away from the house. I tried to leave the city. I even tried to seek help from outsiders, but all of them only led me back to this same place. The house was not just a place to live. It had become a living being with its own will, and I was just an unescapable prey there. Last night I sat in the living room. The flickering candlelight shone on the cracks in the wall. I heard hurried footsteps from the hallway approaching and stopping right behind me. I didn't turn around because I knew what was coming. I just closed my eyes and waited, but then the cold feeling from invisible hands gripping my shoulders made my whole body tremble. Opened my eyes and saw dozens of charred faces standing around them. Their eyes were empty, but their gazes were filled with hatred. I realized that they were all the souls that had been trapped here for ages. They no longer screamed or threatened, but just stood there waiting. I understood the truth that I would become one of them. The house chose me as its next victim. The air thickened. The light in the room slowly faded away. The darkness swallowed everything, and I could clearly hear whispers echoing. Everywhere he belongs to us. The wall cracked open in pieces. A dark hand reached out and grabbed my arm. I struggled desperately, but the force was too great. I was slowly pulled towards the wall, as if sinking into the ground. I screamed one last time, but the sound was swallowed up in the cold void. I saw my own face reflected in the broken mirror, but it was no longer me. That face was distorted, a crooked smile, eyes glowing red like someone who had been completely possessed. I realized I had disappeared, leaving only an empty form to add to the endless list of the house. It all ended in a moment of heavy silence. But then the footsteps echoed in the hallway like a never-ending loop. I understood that one day someone else would walk through this door with the belief that they were the owner first, but the house knew their names before they came, just like it. New Meath is not just my story. This is a warning, a testament that there are places that exist just to hold human souls. This house is one of them, and I am the last living proof, now gone in the darkness, and that was the scary end to my life, an end with no escape, no salvation, only silence that lasts forever in the house that knows my name.